Okay. Shavua Tov. It's with a lot of sadness that we begin this morning's poem, which our psalm that we're going to be doing, at least the first half of it, we're not going to finish it today, sadly fits into the tone of yesterday's events at in Pittsburgh at that tragically, ironically named synagogue, Tree of Life, which turned into a death trap. They have not been releasing the names as yet. The only name I could find online this morning, maybe as the morning goes on, more names will come up, was Daniel Stein. And so two things. Number one, the first line in our poem, which is the Psalm for Wednesday, but we're not going to get this week to why we recite this on Wednesday. Next week we'll get to that. That'll be at the end. And we're not going to finish it, not even come close this week. But the poem begins with the words, Kel Nekomot Hashem. God of vengeance is the Lord. And we're going to try to understand that line, but I'm mentioning this in terms of Daniel Stein, Oliver Shalom, because forever, when people say the name Daniel Stein, they're going to afterwards say, Hashem Yikom Damo, that God should avenge his blood. And we see that all the time on monuments to people who have been killed in terrorist attacks and raids and things of that nature that we put after their names. Not just, that their righteousness should live on and their name should be for a blessing. But we always say, Hashem Yikom Damam, that God should avenge their blood. And so Daniel Stein falls into that category. But I'd like our learning this morning to be in honor and for the benefit of Daniel Langer, who is in the hospital and has already undergone 2 surgeries after the shooting yesterday, and one to remove bullets and the other to repair damage. And so he's still in critical condition. There's a 60-year-old woman whose name has not been released, who was a congregant, and so we should have her, her merit in mind as well. And they say, they said that she is expected to survive, or Bezrat Hashem, and there are 4 policemen in jail. 3 of them, there are 4 policemen in the hospital. 3 of them are lightly injured, and Bezrat Hashem, everything's going to be fine. But one 55-year-old officer, again, whose name, as of 8 o'clock this morning, had not yet been released, is in critical condition. So we hope our learning will be a zchut for them. We're not going to be reciting Tehillim, we're going to be learning Tehillim, but it's the same concept. Pittsburgh, it's called Squirrel Hill. We were there. I'm going to say 6 years ago. 5 years ago. 5 years, 4 or 5 years ago, Rivka and I were driving to Cleveland. My daughter was living in Cleveland, and we took a few days to get there. We stayed one night in Philly at the beginning, then we stayed in Harrisburg, and then the next day we were in Pittsburgh, and we stopped on I forget the name of the street. There's a main street in Squirrel Hill that where there was a kosher pizza shop, and that's where we stopped. Well, we stopped at the first one we found. We were hungry. We stopped at the first one we found. Yeah. And so then we went to a museum in Pittsburgh at the Carnegie Institute, and that's also Squirrel Hill. That we know. I'm sorry, Murray Avenue. Yes, that's true. Wow. Wow. And they were, by the way, there were Israelis on the scene of that they spoke to yesterday. And anyways, so we were there, and it was very pleasant neighborhood. People were very nice to us. We were asking people for directions. It was a very, very pleasant couple of hours that we spent in Pittsburgh. Like I said, on our way to Cleveland, and now that.
That's the only Jewish community that has been the same almost 100 years. They didn't move away.
Right. That was mentioned. There was a list on one of the articles. They said Squirrel Hill, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, was on that list of Jewish neighborhoods like the Lower East Side or the Blue Hill section of Boston. That's the one. They mentioned a couple of others, but Blue Hill section of Boston I recognize. Of course, Lower East Side I recognize. And they said, but every place else on that list is no longer Jewish, and Squirrel Hill still is. And it was very, very bad. And so we should have their merit in mind as we learn this morning. And we begin the first part of the poem, which hopefully we will finish today. The first part of the poem is very, very difficult. And after yesterday's events and other things going on in the world, it rings very, very true. And the line begins, line Aleph and Gimel, verses Aleph and Gimel have the exact same structure to them. You'll see that in a minute. The first is a call to Hashem, is a call to God, and the other one is like a geschrei of a terrible situation. But we'll get to Gimel in a second. But let's start with Aleph. Kel Nekomos Hashem, God, you are the God of Nikama. Now, the real translations for Nikama is vengeance, but people over the years got embarrassed about that translation, and they tried to soften a little bit, and the reason for it was PR. You have to understand, it depended where the writer was, the translator was living, but especially if you were in Christian countries. I'm sorry? Especially in Christian countries, not so much Muslim. In Christian countries, there was a tremendous awareness that the Gentiles would say to us, the Old Testament God is a God of vengeance, and they would quote this line, and the New Testament, which I prefer to refer to as the wrong testament, but the Christian Bible's God is a God of love. And of course, that's bogus. We know that.
We Jews have felt over the years.
And we have felt, yeah. In other words, they're the ones who took it out on us. In other words, they're the ones who had a vengeful, Shavuot Tov, had a vengeful attitude. And so therefore, a lot of authors and translators were careful with how they translated this. And the most famous of these attempts to soft pedal the translation was Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And his, I don't know the German, I apologize, but the English based on his German comes out to God who is champion of justice. That's the translation you have? Oh, you got the Hirsch? Okay, there you go. Okay, and so what's happening is it's you're getting across the idea that it's a plea to God for help, but the help that you're begging for isn't so much revenge as much as it is justice. And it's a beautiful approach to the problem when the Jews, especially in Germany, that was a good example of it, had a PR problem vis-a-vis the Christians. And so that's what they were dealing with. However, I don't think it's true. I think we, as a nation, aren't against the concept of revenge or retribution, however you want to translate it, okay? We are against individuals becoming vigilantes. Now, there's a prohibition in the Torah, lo tikom v'lo titor. Don't take vengeance, but that means don't take vengeance as a private citizen. But we believe the legal system does have the right, perhaps the obligation, to take revenge on evil perpetrators. So we don't look at the word vengeance as a terrible word. We're concerned about vigilantes, but we're not concerned about society going through the proper channels, taking revenge on evildoers for whatever reasons. I mean, this is not a class on vengeance, okay? And so I could do a lot on this, but I'm just going to say we're not sure why vengeance is a reasonable response. We're saying it is, but the jury's out on why it's a reasonable response. I don't know if we're going to get to the verse today, but in Yud Bet, verse Yud Bet, I'm just going to refer to it. It says, Ashrei hagever she'tiasrenu ka. Fortunate, okay, is the person who HaKadosh Baruch Hu chastises. So in other words, the vengeance, assuming the person wasn't actually killed, but the vengeance may be a learning device for the individual who perpetrated the crime. That seems to fit in with verse Yud Bet. We'll get to verse, I don't think we'll get there today, we'll get there next week. But it could be that it's good for society. In other words, if people know that if they do a crime, they're going to get caught and they're going to be punished, that may be. Now, I don't know what the Torah position is. I'm just saying that you could make a lot of different cases for why the Torah, generally speaking, views revenge, vengeance, retribution as, as okay, as just, okay? Right? It's a form of justice. We could spend a whole class trying to describe why. Is it pedagogic? Whatever the reason might be. But you should just know that we look at it in a generally speaking positive light, and why that's a great topic for another lecture in another venue. Please.
Samson Raphael Kirsch translates Pasuk 12 as trained by discipline.
Trained by discipline. He's also soft pedaling a little bit, but it's a nice translation. Tiasrenum, that's musar. The word tiasrena, the verb in the fourth word in line 12 is the same root as musar. So I see that translation, but it means to be straightened out by Kadosh Baruch Hu, and it could include yisurin, was the same root, which means suffering, punishment, pain. Okay? No, thank you. So let's go back to the beginning of the poem, though. Okay? A fascinating thing happens. And this is part of the philosophy of it. Kale is one of the names of God. It's actually the generic name for God, even with a small g, means power. The power for God is of vengeance, okay? Hashem. Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. Yud-Ke Vav-Ke is not the name you would have expected here in this first pasuk. Kale is, Elokim is, but not Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, because Yud-Ke Vav-Ke is the name of God when we talk about Hashem in terms of rachamim, love and mercy and compassion and empathy. So we're saying somehow true nekama, which means divine retribution, is merciful. Does that mean merciful to the recipient, which is what verse 12 is saying, or does it mean it's merciful to society? And that may also be true. But we're saying that the acts of divine justice ultimately are acts of kindness, of love, which is a little against the grain. You wouldn't have expected to see Yud-Ke Vav-Ke in that harsh verse. Okay? So, but it's very powerful that it's there. Now, the Gemara says that when you are kind to the evil, to the Russia, when you're kind to the Russia, ultimately that is a sin. Because if you don't treat the person properly based upon their behavior, society, everybody pays. You haven't done anybody a favor. And that's something that everybody has to be very, very careful about. So, Kel Nakomot Hashem, Kel Nakomot Hofia. Critical word in that sentence is Hofia. Hofia means, probably best translation is appear. Okay? Come out wherever you are. Hofia, show yourself. So in other words, the beginning of the poem is saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu, please let us witness divine justice, retribution, vengeance. We want to see it. And I have to say, that's how we feel this morning. I mean, this is so appropriate to read this after yesterday's horrific events, in Pittsburgh. I mean, and after Friday night's horrific events in the South, the 30 missiles were launched, and 6 people, Baruch Hashem, lightly, but 6 people were injured Friday night in the Sderot area. So, I mean, yes, we feel this way, and it's legitimate, perhaps. I'm not going to turn into a psychologist here. Perhaps healthy attitude when you have these kinds of events. And then the next line helps us in the venting of this anger. Hinaseh shafet haaretz. Let the judge of the world arise. I mean, make himself seen, arise, become manifest. Hashev gemul al geim. Return the exact act of the bad guys on these haughty, arrogant people. I like the term haughty, Haughty, for geim. Haughty, they use haughty. Arrogant is used, bragging, because the idea is many of these evil people who perpetrate these horrible acts. We're specifically now talking about anti-Semitism, but it could be, any violent act. Anti-Semitism is a tremendous problem in the United States. The ADL claims in 2017 there were 1,986 anti-Semitic acts reported, which is a 57% increase over 2016. In other words, anti-Semitism in the United States is definitely on the rise. And it's something that disturbs us very, very much. I mean, Baruch Hashem, we're here, but we still care very much about our brethren in the States, whether for some of us it's family or whatever it is. It's all family, right? It's all family. And these people, when they do it, they're very gay-im. They're proud about it. There's not an attitude of hiding. There's an attitude of I did it and I'm happy. That horrible event in Charlottesville a year ago. The white supremacists were chanting at their famous or infamous march that Friday night. Jews will not replace us. And it's like, it's gay-im. There's no shame, there's no busha in these statements. And it's something that, bothers us very, very much. We see it in Iran. Iran, will have on TV, a missile launch, a missile test, right? And they will write on the side of the rocket, kill Israel. And it's like, there's no busha. There's no shame. These people are gay-im, and it's for us. It's just very, very difficult to take, and therefore asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, do something about it. Let the sheriff come back to town. Right? That's what we need. Kadosh Baruch Hu. Okay. And this plea to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do something about it turns into a krechts in verse Gimel. It's just like we're groaning, we're expressing our pain to Hashem. Ad matai rishaim Hashem. How long are we going to put up with these evil people, Hashem? But I want you to notice, Gimel and Aleph have the exact same format. So in other words, it's Kel Nikomot Hashem, Kel Nikomot Ophia, and then at the end, the next one, where we're feeling the pain and expressing it, Ad matai rishaim Hashem, Hashem in the middle, and then the first phrase gets repeated. Ad matai rishaim, how long is this evil situation, these evil people going to go on? That they are Ya'alozu. What is Ya'alo? Aliza. What's the name Aliza mean? Happy, joyous. How long are they? I mean, when I was a kid, we could use the term gay, but we've lost that word. Okay, we can't use that word anymore. But anyways, how long are they going to be joyous about it? How long are they going to be, that, come on, we've all seen pictures or something, and you see that evil guy with that smirk on his face. And we're saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, wipe that smirk off his face. How long are we going to put up with that smirking face? You can feel the pain of the poet here. It's very, very palpable and powerful here at the end of, at the beginning of chapter 94 here in Psalms. It's very, very powerful. Now the question comes up. I'm quoting here from Amos Chacham, who was a great commentary on Tehillim. He's since passed away, and he wrote the Mosad Rav Kook commentary on the poems, and he asks the following question. You could ask on the whole poem, but I think it's appropriate here in Pasuk Gimel. Mi haim harisha'im. We use the term Rishaim, so that's why I waited to. Who are these Rishaim that we're talking about? Ha'oshkim umidakim et am Hashem. Who are, and he's using the terms that we're going to see coming up. How long are they going to, oshake? How long are they going to, oppress Hashem, the people of God? Who are these people? Ve'et nachalato, and God's portion. So God's portion means the people and the country. Israel as an entity, and Israel as a people. Okay, nachalato, who are God's portion in Olam Hazeh. Klum heim rish'ei hagoyim, o melachim sarim v'shovtim rish'aim mibnei Israel. Are they evil Gentiles, or were they evil kings and officers and rulers within Bnei Israel? And the answer to the question, before I give you his answer, is, well, it depends in what time period you are. In other words, as if we lived under, the two northern kings called Menashe, right? Who were terrible and did avodah zarah and killed many Jews, or Achav, Ahab, right, in the north. If we, then it would be them. It would be those evil Jewish kings. But much of Jewish history has been that these Rishaim are anti-Semitic amongst the Gentiles. So which one is it? I think it depends on what age in which you live. Every poem here has to speak to the reader, and the reader reacts based upon when and where you're living. For Eretz Yisrael right now, it's Hezbollah and Iran or whatever. For the United States, it's it's the white supremacists and all of these terrible hate groups. But it's not so clear. The answer of Amos Chacham is V'datenu noteh loma shemi karav v'nema advarim al rish'ei Yisrael. he feels that the poet is talking about Jewish sinners and evil Jewish leaders is what he's talking about. And the reason that he says it is because of verse Vav, which we're going to get to in just a minute, because verse Vav talks about the almana, the ger, and the yatom, the widow, the stranger, or the convert, or the alien, or the refugee, whatever term you want to use, and the orphan. Those people are many times referred to by the prophets of social justice, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Hosea, Micha, that they're often, that Jewish kings are admonished, or Jewish leadership is admonished for not taking care of these people. So based upon Pasuk Vav, this scholar felt, Dr. Chacham felt that it was Jewish, but I think it's totally dependent on the reader. You know, poetry belongs to the reader, you know, and when we read it, what's our visceral reaction? And today, I hope people don't have Jews in mind when they read, you know, verse Gimel. I don't think so. I think today,
So many enemies.
the list is long enough. But I think that generally we don't think of Jews. I think today we think of the famous, you know, anti-Semitic groups out there, you know, the Shiites surrounding us here. And
I think Jews are causing a lot of problems as well.
I mean, yeah. But I think my visceral or knee-jerk reaction is it's guys like, you know, Robert Bowl, or Yamach Shimon, right? Like yesterday. That's my, or it's, you know, the leaders in Iran. That's my visceral reaction. But I think, you know, when we're not sure exactly when this poem was written during this biblical period, it may have been against certain horrible Jewish kings, which sadly existed in our past. Verse Daled. Wow, verse Daled is mamish talking to our generation. I don't know what it meant in, let's say, the 7th century BCE, if Dr. Chacham is correct, you know, that it was that, you know, that period of Jewish history when there were evil Jewish kings. I don't know what the verse meant, but now, boy, do I know what this verse means. Yeah, gesund. Yabiu yidabru atak. They express themselves. They speak words of atak. Atak, best translation for atak is chutzpah. It's words of harsh, of just denigration. They just spew this stuff out. Yitamru kol po'aleavon. They talk about. Yitamru, this is the only place in Tanakh where the verb to speak is in the hitpa'el form. Yitamru, hitpa'el. And people aren't really sure so much how to translate it because the form is unique. But to me, we have 3 verbs of expression. To me, it means that these evil people use every means of communication at their disposal to publicize, to brag about their evil deeds. There is, like I said before, there's no busha. They just, when you watch movies like Gentleman's Agreement, which was made in the late 40s, I'm embarrassed to say it referred to the community next door to where we lived in Connecticut. We were living in Stamford. Next door is Darien, where supposedly the anti-Semites lived in that movie. But anti-Semitism, as expressed in a movie like that, was people didn't have the chutzpah. They weren't me'ez panav. They didn't have the arrogance to do it publicly. It was all behind the back, and it was all innuendo. But that's not what this poem is talking about, and that's not what's happening today. when you opened up this morning newspaper and you read about, Robert Bola, your Yamach Shemo, you just saw all of his, stuff that he says online. I mean, when you go to Yad Vashem and they have some of the speeches made by Hitler, Yamach Shemo, there was no, but we're just going to kill these people. We're going to kill these people. We're going to take their stuff. And like I said, that's what this verse is talking. I don't know how it manifests itself before the Common Era, because they didn't have the same the same possibilities of social media that we have today. But today we use 3 different verbs because they use every opportunity and every means at their disposal to spread this venomous filth. And that's what's going on in verse Dalet. And like I said, it's wow, what a modern expression going on in that verse. And I want to read to you quickly from the Malbim. Meir Leibish ben Yechiel Michal, writing in 1840, talks about the 3 terms. He says, Yabiya Yedabu Yedamru, Nava Mitzayin Nezilat Hadvarim Min HaMakor HaMachshava. Novea is used for water. It just flows out from their thoughts. It flows. That's Novea. That's the first verb. I'm sorry? Nivea, right, the water, right, thank you. And we got a little commercial one for a water company. You don't work for them, Shimon, do you? No. Okay. Hadibur mitzayen harchavat hadvarim berayot v'ta'anot. So the first thing, the first beginning of the spewing out is it just flows from their, rabid imaginations. But the next verb, yedabru, when they speak about it, they expand upon it, making up all sorts of theories and claims, and it just becomes, that their visceral hatred is turned into an ideology, which we know happens. And they'll use pseudoscience. The Hitler, Yamach Shemam, the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, they said this is the obvious outgrowth of Darwinian science, right? That it's a genetic disease to be Jewish, Chalila. And so that's the Devarim. And what's the last one? Shemore al hamedome shenitba lehem shechlitu amira michra'at muftait. So what happens is, and Yitamru means they then state it as the hitbayel is just a strengthening of saying it. They state it as fact. In other words, first it was just random thoughts. Then they gave it reasons and scientific background, and then it becomes, a dictum. It becomes as stated as fact. That's it, amru, according to the Malbim. So there's a process going on in the anti-Semitism of these Rishaim, and the result of these evil people is verse Hey. Amcha Hashem Yidaku. Your people have now become oppressed.
Oppressed or depressed?
No, we are depressed because we're oppressed. Dikaon, we've now been placed in a low spot, and we use it to mean depression, but it's the oppression that got us. We are now Yidaku. The people have been crushed. Is a common translation. The crushed, down, lowered, and then nachalatcha. So we're called first your nation, and then your portion to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Nation is more political and less personal. Your possession at the end is more affectionate, is more personal. Have been ya'anu, have been tortured. Inui is torture. We use the term on Yom Kippur, the 5 things we can't do on Yom Kippur called inuyim. We usually translate as afflictions. But the word often, inui, often means torture. Your portion, your children, your offspring, your possession are being tortured. And that's verse A, which feeds into verse Vav. And this we referenced already, Almana v'ger, who are the ones who suffer the most? The ones who suffer the most when there is this anti-Semitism, when there is this oppression, the ones who suffer the most are the weak. And the weak historically are described as the widow. In the pre-modern world, women really didn't have much power. Baruch Hashem, I think we're doing better. I think women still, haven't equaled men in their position in society, but I hope we're working on it. I think we are. But in the ancient world, the pre-modern world, the women had no power. So if you were widowed, you were really stuck. Ger, strangers, could mean converts, could mean, a ger toshav, a non-Jewish.
Or a Jew living in a foreign land.
Or Jew living in a foreign land. The stranger, the one who doesn't have roots, that person is in trouble. And of course, Yatomim, orphaned. Now, orphaned is explained by Chazal as don't have a father. It doesn't mean orphan from the mother, because remember, in the ancient world, when this was written, it was the father that had the ability to support. And the children didn't get oppressed, God forbid, their mother passed away, but they were oppressed if their father passed away, because then there was no one to support them and fend for them. And so a yatom is normally a young person without a father. But in modern Hebrew, we just use it generally for orphans, but in biblical and rabbinic Hebrew, it meant fatherless. Because if you had a widowed mother, that didn't help you very much. Okay.
Is there any reason given for the difference of the verbs? Yaharogu for the first two and Yiratzehu for the second?
I think there's a difference. I'm glad, guys. I was going to say, because most of them, unfortunately, just say they're using different expressions, just for variety and to move on. I think that when you were talking about the almana and the ger, people tended to be sneakier about it. But when it came to the orphans, they just felt it was open season on orphans. Orphans really had nobody to fend for them, which is interesting, because you would have thought that the most powerless person I would have thought was the ger. But in the construct of this sentence, the most powerless person was the orphan. And I'm not sure, why. It may have been a reflection, Jay, of something that was going on in the society at that time. Whatever time it was King David we're talking about in the 10th century BC. According to many Meforshim, was during the time, it was later, during the 7th or 8th centuries BCE. It may have been a reality that the orphans had more trouble. But Yiratzehu means that there was no effort to hide the fact that you were killing them. It was outright murder. In the other cases, it was perhaps more subtle. And I think it's because it's showing us, or it's expressing, that at that time, the orphan was the least protected member of society.
Maybe because the ger and the widow, they're older, and the orphan is young.
Perhaps it has to do with age. It may. I'm not sure. But I think historically, the people that suffered the greatest in society were the strangers, because generally there was no one to take up their cause. Well, generally, the widow and the orphan might have a family member around to help or whatever. But in this case, the orphan is looked at as the one who is the most vulnerable of the three. Now, thank you, Jay, for asking. But that seems to be, I have a little trouble with that, but I think that's what's being said, that the orphan is the most vulnerable member of society. Okay. Yeah, Amalek attacked from the back and got the weakest, and the weakest was the aged, in that case, according to the famous Midrash, the aged and the little children. So that you're sort of agreeing with Shimon. It was their youth that made them so vulnerable. Maybe. Okay, which brings us to the last verse in the first section. Okay, the last verse in the first section. The Yomru. We are now giving a voice to these evil people. This is what they're saying. Lo yireh ka. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't see this. I can do what I want. God's not watching. Now we know that generally this is something we emphasize in the time around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We emphasize HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees all, and that's going to be said in the middle section. We're going to talk about that. But the evil people are just saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't see, velo yavin Elokei Yaakov, that God doesn't see everything. We can hide our actions, and the God of Jacob doesn't really understand what we're doing. In other words, the haughty arrogance of this group is such that they believe that they can get away with literally murder. They can get away with anything because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't watch. And the second half of the verse is sort of saying doesn't care. That even if HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw it, you're not going to do anything about it. And that's a hurtful sentence. I mean, it literally hurts to say those words. But we're quoting, the bad guys. Please.
Maybe he's not only not seeing the bad guys, maybe he's not seeing the victims.
That too.
Well,
That too. But the people that are speaking are the bad guys, and they're saying, although you could make a shot that the people speaking are the sufferers from verse 5. I can't say that you're wrong. That shot is definitely possible.
Evil ones could be saying God doesn't care about you.
Yeah. No, that's true. But some people place it. These are the words of Yeush. These are the words of despair of the people who are suffering. I don't think that's true. But that pshat exists. I like the pshat that these are the words of the bad guys. And they're not only putting down people, they're putting down Hashem. And this goes back to the beginning of the paragraph, right? Back to the first 3 verses. Hashem, do something about it. You're being mocked, okay? And that's the very painful beginning to this poem. And the middle section begins a sense of improvement, where the poet is now theologically dealing with the issues raised in the first section. Please.
and this must have happened at a very terrible time in our history.
That's the point of Dr. Chacham, that he says this poem was written, he believes, around the same time that Yeshayahu and other of the Nevi'im Achronim were chastising society because of the treatment of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, and it was therefore a terrible time. Yes. However, I'm going to go back to what I said. I think everybody reads it in their own context, and right.
But the author,
according to Chacham, it meant that period when, especially the northern leadership, but sometimes the southern leadership too. The southern, we had evil kings in the south that sacrificed their children, in gay Ben Hinnom, just a few blocks from there, right? I mean, there were really evil kings in the south as well. We think of Menashe here in the south and Achav in the north, but they were on both sides of the border. There were evil kings, and again, who suffers? The weakest in society, and that goes back to verse 12. So this is the terrible introduction, beginning of this poem. That's the situation being described, and the turnaround starts in verse Chet. By the way, this is not uncommon in poetry, especially those of King David. This was not necessarily ascribed to David HaMelech. Like I said, some people want to say it was written during the 7th and 8th century BCE, when a lot of the kingdoms were going through terrible times. But in the poems of King David, in his Psalms, often the beginning of the poem presents the problem, and you have to work it through till you get to the end for a solution and for some hope. And that's the style in this poem as well. And it begins with a very powerful alliteration. I'll tell you why it's a powerful alliteration in a minute. Binu bo'arim ba'am. Binu, the reason it's a strong alliteration is because the B sound, the bet, b, is a strong sound. Binu bo'arim ba'am. It's powerful change with almost like a drum beat to it. Binu, get some understanding. Now, there's a pun going on here. What was said at the end of verse Zion was HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't notice or understand or comprehend or pay attention or care. So he's now taking that word Yavin that they say HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do and saying, I'm turning to you and telling you, you have to start to understand something. And he's addressing these people as Bo-arim. What a Bo-arim? Be'er. Boors. There's the same word in English, basically. Yeah. You idiots. You empty people. You people of no understanding. Binu. I'm going to teach you. Pay attention. Learn. Understand. There's a message in this for you. And you better get that message quickly or you're in trouble. Binu, Borem Ba'am. And that's the change in the poem. Now we're going to be saying much more hopeful things. I mean, there's going to be a couple of sad things at the end, mentioned again, because it's going to get, the last third gets personal. But we're not going to get there till next week. But the turnaround takes place here in Chet. Ukesilim. So he gives two expressions, descriptions of the bad guys. The first one is they're empty-headed. They spout or they spew out these theories which are totally illogical and stupid and show their lack of understanding. That's number one. And so the first term means empty. The next term, ksila, means, and you know what? Even if you had a little knowledge, you wouldn't know what to do with it because you're stupid. You are intellectually deficient. A kasil is intellectually challenged. I'm sorry? A fool. But it means congenitally a fool. In other words, you don't have the capability of getting it. Is a kasil, as opposed to a be'er, boor, bo'arim. Those people, and by the way, petty is in that first category. So those are people who just are unlettered. Now, that category is teachable. Ksio, by its nature, it's going to be hard for that person to pick up the lesson. But it says, Matai taskilu, you idiots, when are you going to become smart? In other words, he's saying, ultimately, there is a possibility of a turnaround. What can cause the turnaround? Boy, do I wish I knew. Part of the turnaround comes from punishment. That's the point of the beginning of the poem. That somehow, Uksilam matai taskilu. When are you going to get it?
They don't accept it.
They don't accept it. At this point, they're unable to hear it.
They don't,
Yeah, at this point, they're unable to hear it. Nikuda. And then he says, remember verse Zion. God doesn't see, God doesn't hear, God doesn't get it. And he says in verse 10, Hanota Ozen, the person that implanted the ears on people, Halo Yishma, it's God who can't hear. I mean, God invented hearing. Hearing comes from God. Im Yotze Ayin, Halo Yabit, the one who formed eyes doesn't see. You said stupidity back there in verse Zion. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears all, sees all. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the ultimate witness of history. And that's being expressed here in verse 10. So first we say, verse Chet, you guys need a little lesson. You guys, you don't get it. You're just stupid. Then then one of the points of their stupidity is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of all of these powers that you're talking about. How can you not therefore attribute these powers themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Hayoser Goyim Halo Yochiach. Now, I'm not sure what events are being referred to in this. The Yoser Goyim, that's a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the one who chastises, who punishes Gentiles. Halo Yochiach, isn't he going to do tochacha? Isn't he going to chastise you? Now, what the poet is referring to, I'm not sure. The simplest is, I'm sorry?
You left out Im Yotze Ayin.
Yeah, the one who formed the eye can't see. No, I did mention maybe too quickly. I apologize. First he says the one who implanted ears can't hear. You said God doesn't notice. And the one who formed eyes doesn't see. This is part of the answer to Zion. But now he's giving a very careful warning to the bad guys. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a long history of punishing evildoers. Now it could go back to Noah. It could go back to Yetziat Mitzrayim. What specific historical events it's talking about, I don't know. However, there's a midrash that says neither. There's a midrash that says it's talking about the period of the Shoftim. I think this midrash is placing the poem in the time of King David. And just before the period of King David were the period of the judges, and there were a cycle of nations, Ammon, Moab, Plishtim, right, that oppressed the Jewish nation, and one by one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent a champion to get them off of our backs. So the Midrash lists the events during the period of the judges, during the book of Shoftim. And that may be because they want the poem to be in the time of David. So if it's in the time of David, that's what the poet would be referring to, what happened in the previous generations closest to the time frame of King David, which is fine. But I think every generation looks at this, and I think we say, look what happened to Hitler. You want to end like Hitler? I mean, I think we can. Look at Nasser. He didn't end up so good. And I think that every generation should be able to turn to these Rishaim with an example of someone who was out to get us.
The Russians.
You could say Stalin, right? You could say Stalin. His end was pretty embarrassing, right? Well, I'm sorry? Eichmann. Okay, that's the movie that's out now. I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, no. In other words, the Midrash is trying to give it a context, and historically we can give many examples. But for me, when I look at the pasuk, I'm saying this. I'm thinking this is what we can say to people that oppress the Jews don't necessarily have a happy ending.
But a lot of Jews didn't have a happy ending along the way.
Along the way, that's true. No, yeah, and you can't. But it's a big problem, and it's something that we have difficulty, contemplating. I'm not Khalila. I'm not denigrating that concept, which is very powerful and very painful. But I think every generation has to think of what they can say. Now, are we saying this to the Russia? Are we saying this to the Russia, which seems to be pshat? Or are we saying it to ourselves? And the answer, I think, is both. That we have to, so that we can go to sleep tonight, have to believe that, that these evil people are going to be dealt with like Hashem did to Pharaoh and to Haman and to Hitler, that I think that's how we deal, or helpfully helps us a little bit with dealing with this very difficult issue. Today is a painful day in Jewish history. And I think that, we need this sense of we're doing something. Of course, as we said at the beginning, we are reciting Psalms, in their memory to one group and for their merit and for their refuah shlema to the other group. But we have to feel that something is happening, and that these are issues that happened yesterday, but we're going to deal with it in such a way that, please God, we won't have to deal with it again in the future. And Bezrat Hashem, next week, we'll finish the poem, number one. And number two, we'll get to the point we haven't even started discussing. Why is this the psalm for Wednesday? Next week, the poem is much more pleasant than the beginning of the poem. And I pray to God that next Sunday, we're in a more pleasant place than we are this morning. Shavua Tov.
We have some refreshments here sponsored with